Awesome. That was a great introduction. Thank you so much for having me. I know both me and Liam are super excited to be here and talk to you guys about some of the research that we've been doing for the past 3 months in the insurance industry, and also talk about some of the technologies that we've been learning about and how we can kind of use these to accelerate the insurance industry. So the one thing that really gets me excited in the morning is the fact that our world is exponentially growing every single day. We have crazy technologies at our fingertips, and in today's world, we're literally living through this revolution that's completely changing the way we're gonna live our lives. We have technologies like artificial intelligence. We're automating a lot of these manual processes, increasing efficiency rate for processes that we never thought could be possible. Or things like quantum computers, increasing computation power, allowing us to do things and unlock things that we've never done before. When I think about companies and industries that are trying to get in on these technologies and innovations, there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now, but I actually think it's almost like a race. We're running towards figuring out how our company can take this technology, implement it as quick as we can, so we can create a solution. But I actually think a lot of us are thinking of it in the wrong way. It's not a question of if we should do it and how to do it. It's actually a question of when we should do it. And by no means, I'm no expert in the insurance industry, but after doing a little bit of research, I actually think the insurance industry today on the spectrum lies more so on the late majority. But this isn't really a bad thing. I think there's so much potential and opportunity that we still haven't tapped into. And so the question I started asking myself is, how do we move ourselves from this late majority part of the spectrum to becoming innovators, becoming early adopters? And the reason why this is important is, just from a history standpoint, we see companies like, for example, Blockbuster as an example, that were part of the late majority, but then companies like Netflix coming along that were innovators and early adopters. And eventually, over time, what happens is these companies take over, right? So now we have Netflix, and people love these services, online streaming, and that's the sole thing that they're known for. And it's very similar to industries, right? We have industries like retail, which are also pretty part of the late majority, and then companies like Amazon, which are changing the way we're doing streaming online, allowing us to access a lot of these different services, which are way, way better than retail traditionally. And so what happens is exact same. Amazon takes over, and we start to use a lot more of their services. And so here we are today. And I think there's so much potential for us to move along and start to level up in the industry. And we're already starting to do that. And so the question is, how do we move ourselves to becoming innovators, becoming early adopters? So eventually, when people think of insurance, they don't just think of, oh, I need to get a claim for my car, but instead they think of, oh, this is just I'm buying this product, I'm buying this service. Now I can go into the insurance industry. And so how do we inject ourselves into every part of the customer's life? The 3 main things I think that are holding us back from doing this today is, number 1, we might not really fully understand the opportunity. Right? I think we've heard about a lot of these big terms thrown around, like blockchain, AI, it's going to change the way this industry works, but we don't really understand exactly how. So first thing is we need to really understand where the opportunity lies. The second thing is overcoming a lot of the preconceived notions that we have in our head about how this technology will work. Will it even work? How do you actually implement it? So really understanding that it can be done, and it has been done, actually. How do we start to change our organizations, become more agile, and start to promote more risk so people are more incentivized towards taking risks and trying new things? So my goal from today's presentation is to talk about every single one of these things and how I think we can actionably do this within this industry. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is the opportunity? And as you heard from the intro, I've been doing tons of research in technology, and I think a lot of that obviously lies in technology. And so, like Chris talked about, I think he put it perfectly, TKS is basically like a human accelerator program for high school students. And ever since I joined this program, my life has completely changed. I've been learning about really interesting technologies like AI, blockchain, quantum computing, and thinking about how we can leverage these to solve some of our world's most pressing and hardest problems today. So I got really deep into blockchain and artificial intelligence, got to speak at conferences all over the world, like Elevate Tech Fest and TruffleCon in Seattle. And then right at the very top, that's me doing a fireside chat with Don Tapscott, who's one of the biggest names in the blockchain industry. This summer, I also had the awesome opportunity to be one of the first high school interns at TD Bank working on AI and blockchain solutions for digital identity, helping us leverage client data better to help people get access to different financial services. So the platform that I was working on at TD is called Verified Me, and the idea is how do we let users get more control over their data so they can use it as a way to get access to things like insurance and credit history and credit scores. The way that it works is the blockchain part of the solution basically helps us connect with different parties. So if we have the bank, for example, we have the insurance company, and we have the individual. How do we connect those all in a really seamless process using blockchain? And so now on this platform, you can automatically do things like managing your personal data, checking for your credit score. And let's say you want to register for Sun Life, or you want to open up a new insurance account. How do you easily do that as a user on this platform? And so this is a POC that I was working on developing this summer. After doing a ton of research and spending a lot of time learning about these technologies and going super deep, I definitely think insurance has a huge opportunity, and I think we all know that. The problem is, what thing do we want to tap into first? And what is it that we want to actionably do to start moving forward? And I actually think the first thing, or at least the biggest technology where a lot of this opportunity lies today, is within blockchain. And so blockchain is basically like a decentralized technology, and I know a lot of us have heard about this tech thrown around, probably around like VCs and a lot of these startups, but today I want to talk about how this actually works. So traditionally, a lot of our systems are very centralized. We have a single authority or single database that stores all of our information and all of our data. The idea with blockchain is to completely remove that and create a decentralized network where we still have a bunch of nodes, so we still have a bunch of individuals within this network, but now everyone has equal access into the database. So this is good for a few reasons. We don't have things like hacking happening as much because it's a lot harder for you to hack when there's not one single database to tap into. It's also a lot more secure. It's a lot more transparent. As a person, you can just understand everything that's happening in the network because all of it's easily recordable. So there's a few core concepts, and I'll briefly talk about these and kind of how they work, just so we have a little bit of an idea. The first thing that's super important for blockchain is the type of ledger, which is the distributed ledger. And so this is really important for the way that we're connecting with different parties and how our data is being stored. So that's a fundamental infrastructure that we're building a lot of our technology on. The second thing, which is really interesting, is the idea of having data which we can store in sequential blocks. And so almost imagine it as blocks, which represents one transaction. So if I'm sending money over to you, for example, that would become one transaction, so a new block is now created, and it's noting down important pieces of information like timestamp. So when was that piece of information put in? Hash numbers, which is almost like a unique ID for that certain block, and the hash value or the ID value of the previous block. And so that makes it really easy for auditability purposes if you want to see all of the transactions when they happened and being able to trace back in history and check to make sure things actually happened. So it's really good for authenticating and verifying. You can probably already see where a lot of this opportunity lies. The third thing is cryptographic keys, and this is used for allowing you to have permissions around who can access data. So if I send you one piece of information, you need to have the right private key to actually access that data. And so if you don't have that, you won't be able to open it. It's also really easy to see tampering that happens on the network. So if someone's doing something that wasn't part of the network, then it's easy to catch it and actually stop it right away in the network. So the two main opportunities I want to highlight today is number one, fraud detection, risk prevention, and the second one for claims management. And so this ties into a lot of different sectors in insurance, but I'll be giving a few examples in health and life insurance. I think that's where a lot of the stuff with claims management could be super interesting. So fraud and risk is a huge problem. From what I found, $80 billion are lost due to really heavy processes, due to manual heavy processes. So things like validating the claims authenticity, ownership, and history, a lot of that is still done very manually, and so we're losing $80 billion. The second part of the problem is actually collecting the data. So when we're collecting to verify something, we're collecting it from public, private domains, a lot of these different parties, and that process is very fragmented right now. And so how do we basically streamline this and connect all of the parties in one network where we can easily upload all of our data and verify it? And so the way this would work is on a blockchain ledger, where basically your input would be the claims. And so it's taking into account things like policy and then the enablers and giving you an output of the fraud decision. And so is this actually something that is fraudulent, or is it something that's very secure and you don't actually have to worry about it? The way this is really good is because on this network, you basically have all of these parties connected. And so you can connect with different parties that that user was involved with and verify that this actually did happen in history. So for example, if someone comes to you with a car and they say, I want to file a claim for this dent, you can actually verify that that dent happened before that person filed that claim. It happened right when the person filed it. And so if they didn't, then you can see maybe this is something that you need to look into. And so this has a huge amount of impact in the industry. It allows you to eliminate things like double booking and processing different multiple of the similar claims. It also allows you to establish ownership by having things like digital certificates and reducing any sort of counterfeiting that happens within the system. It also helps with reducing premium diversion. So for example, in the case of an unlicensed broker selling insurance and pocketing premiums. Second thing that I think is really, really revolutionary is claims management. There's so much interesting stuff already happening in this space, but I think in general, this is a huge opportunity to completely change the way that we're doing claims management today. And so what I looked into was mainly with healthcare. So healthcare insurance is generally a pretty lengthy process because there's a lot of tracing of data you need to do, verification, and you need to be able to make sure you're doing the payments in an orderly manner. And so a lot of these processes today are not streamlined. Another big issue is there's an inaccuracy of the directory data. So around $2.1 billion are actually lost a year to keep this, or are spent to keep this information updated. So you need to update this information to make sure it's the most recent. But in a recent survey, I actually found that 52% of all provider locations listed that in 64 of their online directories, they had at least one error in them. So clearly what we're doing today is not the most efficient. So again, we can introduce a blockchain ledger system where we can encode a lot of these policies in it. So something in blockchain is basically like a smart contract. And this is almost like real life contracts that you have, but they're encoded online. And so a lot of these can automatically, if a claim happens, it could be connected with IoT systems on the blockchain that can automatically initiate the claim. And so what it's doing internally is it's already double checking all of the data pieces and verifying that this actually makes sense and this is a claim the person should file. And the output it'll give you is the claim itself. So it's making a lot of the decision for you, which currently is not very streamlined. And in healthcare, it basically helps you automate a lot of the value chain. So I almost think of it as like being able to extend our supply chain and being able to track every step of the way. So currently, providers perform medical services for a patient. The second part of this would be getting clinical data from a patient and actually recording this into the system. And then you have a standardized set of data corresponding to the specific ID system, and this is put onto an API, the blockchain API. And then you set different network permissions to validate that the submitter actually has access to the blockchain system. You have a smart contract, which is doing a lot of the automation, so it's automating processes for whatever's incoming and giving you an output. And then what happens is a new data block is formed, and that transaction is recorded in the system. So I actually worked on a project very similar to this with a company called Consensus and got some help from IBM. And the idea with this project was to actually track medication in supply chain. And so currently there's tons of counterfeit medication. Around 20 to 30% of our medication in the world is actually counterfeit. And the main reason is because we don't have a system to track medication all the way from manufacturer to a consumer. And so using the system, we can verify every step of the way that this is the right product and record it on a system that can cross-reference the data. So the way it works is you have your supplier, you have your carrier, your manufacturer, all the way to your customer. And so every step of the way, what it's doing is it's creating a new block for every new transaction that happens as it moves along in the supply chain. So if you think about this, this could have a huge impact on the way that we're doing claims management today. After looking at a bunch of surveys, we can actually reduce processing costs, so things like claims personnel, vendor management, and other transaction fees that happen in between by around 80%. And we can also reduce a lot of the time that we spend doing this, so the average handling times by around 40%. And we have a system that is always updated, always 24/7, and it's always running. We can also increase productivity for a lot of our workers, so around 50% increase in productivity for things like certain transactions and eliminating any sort of human error that we have. And as a result of that, we're improving our customer experience. So the second part of this equation is, okay, now we know the opportunity, we understand how it works, but does it actually work, right? A lot of us are like, okay, I get it, there is some substance to this, but how does it actually work? Like, is this something that's tangibly feasible for us today? And it actually is. And the way I want to show you guys is just by listing out a few companies that have already implemented this and that have been super successful at it. So R3 Coda, if you guys are interested, is actually the most common protocol that a lot of insurance companies have moved towards. So initially, the industry was very segregated. Companies were looking at a lot of different blockchains, but this is a very common system that everyone has actually adopted. And companies like EY, IBM, and Microsoft are actually using this today for some of their services. And so one company called LifeWave, which was losing millions of dollars in claims management, actually saw 80% cost savings when they implemented this system. And companies like B3I, which is also based off of Corda, is basically rethinking the way insurance is being done today, and they've partnered up with over 40 insurance providers, and they've seen around success rate with 35 out of those 40. And recently, Microsoft actually did a partnership with a bunch of companies, launched this in China and a few other countries for marine hull insurance called InsureWave. And basically, they've won a ton of awards for this, and a lot of companies have actually started to adopt this as a new way to track their insurance for marine services. And so hopefully that proves a little bit that this is actually feasible, and companies are doing it today. But the problem now is, okay, we understand how the tech works, we understand the opportunity, we kind of see, okay, maybe this is feasible, companies are doing it, maybe it's worth looking into this. But how do we actually implement this? How do we take this knowledge and turn it into action? So the way I like to think of this is basically like, I don't know if you guys watch The Lord of the Rings, but this is like the scene where Frodo's like trying to, he's identified where the ring is, but he now needs to like go through all of these people to actually get it. And so now is where like the actual challenge starts, right? You're like, how do I actually go and get it? Like there's so much that I have to figure out. And I think that's where a lot of us are today, is we're we know where it is, but we don't actually, until we take the chance to do it, we won't see a lot of what we have to overcome. Also, while I was searching that up, I found this picture, this really cute cat, and got a little distracted, but yeah. And so I think the way we can do this is actually through our teams. So if we think about it traditionally, right, we valued IQ a lot. We wanted someone who had the intelligence. They knew what they were doing. They had the degree. We were like, okay, this person knows what they're doing. Let's hire them. Okay, it's changed a little bit from that, right? We're also looking at things like EQ now, things like self-awareness. Is this person motivated? Is this person responsible? That's how a lot of our hiring systems have changed and evolved over time. But I think the next step is actually AQ. And AQ is what we have to work towards. And AQ is our ability to actually do things and take risks to work towards them. And so what I think we need to start doing is promoting more risks in our organization. How do we incentivize employees and workers to be willing to take a ton of risks and try different things so that we are actually evolving, we're taking action, we're not afraid of changing the way that we've traditionally done things. And so when I think about the future of this industry, I get really, really excited because I think there's so much opportunity and so much work that we can do and work towards. And I think all of us in this room today can become frontiers in changing the way this industry has been working for ages. And so we move from becoming late majority to becoming innovators, becoming early adopters, becoming someone that people care about as customers want to use. So the question I want to leave you guys pondering with is, how can you leverage blockchain to improve insurance? And I want us to actually start having discussions. When you go back to your teams, start to ask them questions about how you could do this. And if you're already looking at it, think about what next steps you can actually take to work towards this. And I think it's important to understand the opportunity, but it's also important to take action and start to try things. I think with every new technology, there will be some sort of nuance to it. But as long as we're willing to try, I think there's a lot of potential. And I'd love to connect with you guys if you have any questions and want to learn more about me or just have any general questions. This is my LinkedIn, Twitter, email, everything. Thank you.